I would now like to introduce David Miller, who will begin our keynote speech. So, David, thank you very much.
Okay. Now, we're going to talk about the development of understanding leading to state-of-the-art welfare assessment. You'll find that I walk around a bit, that's why I've got the mobile microphone. But just a little bit of background. I was born in Melbourne. With an identical twin brother. A year ago we celebrated 150 years of genetically identical living. There aren't many people who can say that. This year it was 152, but that's got less impact, I think. In 1955, my younger brother and I had illness as a kid, and so I was a year behind my twin, which was good fortune for me because my younger brother and I spent a year on an uncle's farm in the Barossa Valley, in Eden Valley. And that's probably why I'm standing up here today, because I was introduced to farming and the farm life during that year. It was absolutely wonderful. I then went back to Melbourne and first degrees at New England University in Armidale. I did a BSc Honours in Physiology. Then went over to Edinburgh, where I was for 21 years in a veterinary research institute, looking at pregnancy, birth and perinatal physiology and the welfare of newborn animals, not the welfare, the survival of newborn animals. As an 8 to 9 year old, I learned to ride. Waverley Riding School in Melbourne, and I rode until I discovered sailing at the age of 14, and then of course that was all embedded, so I had a bit of experience with riding. My first job was as a jackaroo in Western New South Wales during my first university vacation, and that happened during the second vacation as well. And a few years ago, my 27-year-old son learned to ride pre-teen, and so I sort of taught him how to ride and so on. So I've had a bit of contact with horses, but from Edinburgh I went 31 years ago. So you got it? 24, 21, 31, 76. And you've got that from the 75 plus 1, didn't you? Okay. What was I talking about? Okay. Where I went into the veterinary school, so I had actually 21 years in a veterinary research institute in Scotland, and then 31 years associated with the veterinary school in Palmerston North in New Zealand. For the last 31 years I've been deeply involved in animal welfare science, which also brought in the perinatal physiology once we started talking about the welfare of fetuses and newborns. We won't necessarily be talking about that today, but if anyone has an interest in that, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Okay, I retired 6 months ago. Actually, I redirected 6 months ago, and so hence the emeritus professor stuff. I was Foundation Director of the Animal Welfare Science and Bioethics Centre at Massey from the time we founded it in 1998. IAWC Limited is the company that I'm Scientific Director of, which we founded in 2004 to do contract work for a range of people, including the World Bank and Rabobank and others interested in developing welfare policies. I'm here both as an associate of Massey University and also in terms of the company. Now, don't worry about all of that. There will be a PDF file of all the slides here, so you don't need to take notes and you can just sit back and enjoy it. Is this okay? Am I getting close? Somehow when I walk over here, this sort of seems to reverberate. Okay, so there are a number of publications that I mentioned there. The ones in animals are available for free download. Anyone who wants any of the others, let me know and I'll send you PDF files. So our purpose when we're thinking of animal welfare is for animals to thrive, not merely survive. And to that end, we're going to think of, in general headings, freedoms, provisions, and welfare aims, the 5 domains model, and then 7 key applications of the model. Now, I should just make another couple of points. One is that I'm not here telling you what's wrong with horse welfare. That's not my purpose at all. My purpose here is to introduce you to the way we are now thinking about welfare, show you how we've moved, not in full detail about the pattern of development of the way we think, but there will be elements of that, as you will see. But it's to give you an up-to-date understanding of how welfare is currently understood, because that is what will lead thinking in welfare, and that is what people will have in mind when they're talking to you about the welfare of sport horses and rescued horses and any other horses. I've had the great pleasure to work with Marty with New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing over the last couple of years on the development of their strategy, and Marty will be talking to you about that process and will be participating especially tomorrow, but also actively in any discussions that we have. Let's just start thinking now about these different areas. Freedoms, provisions, welfare aims, emphasising when we talk about the 5 freedoms, the importance of the provisions, and then we'll talk about my substitute for the 5 freedoms, and that is the 5 provisions welfare aims. This is it? Oh, okay. I'm not going to sing Old Man River yet. All right, so 5 freedoms. Here we go. Now, many of you, how many are familiar with the 5 freedoms? Yeah, pretty well all of them. Okay. I'm going to disabuse you of the value of the 5 freedoms before we go too far, but I'm not going to leave you hanging with nothing. I'm going to give you a substitute. So, freedom from thirst, hunger and malnutrition by providing ready access to fresh water and a diet to maintain full health and vigour, etc. Right? So, discomfort and exposure, pain, injury and disease, fear and distress, and then to express normal behaviours. Very familiar. And then the provisions. Now, the 5 freedoms were hugely, and have been hugely influential. John Webster developed them in the early 90s, 93, 94, and one of the reasons they were so helpful was because they scoped the wider dimensions of animal welfare. Subjective experiences, what the animals feel, what they experience emotionally, health status and behaviour. Although John would not have talked about emotional, he would have been thinking thirst and hunger aren't really emotions, they are subjective experiences, and we'll talk quite a bit about them shortly. It also specified areas of welfare concern: thirst, hunger, fear, distress, discomfort and pain, and states. So negative experiences and states: malnutrition, injury, disease, and limits on behavioural expression. So they were very, very influential. They identified 5 targets for welfare activity, freedoms, and detailed practical ways to meet those targets. Very good. And when I first entered Massey University in 1988, and started talking about animal welfare, interestingly enough, and I asked sort of veterinarians and also veterinary students what animal welfare was, I got the goldfish response. You know what the goldfish response is? The mouth is opening and closing, but you can't hear anything. Why? Because they didn't have any way of thinking about and talking about animal welfare. The 5 freedoms was the only thing that was comprehensively available at that time and was really very good. And that's why most of you know about it, but I hope I'm going to take you several orders of magnitude beyond the 5 freedoms in the next hour or so. Now, I want to emphasize a point. When you look at laws and when you look at welfare standards that are based on the 5 freedoms or refer to the 5 freedoms, they're actually referring to the provisions. They don't talk about thirst, hunger and so on. They talk about how you manage the animals to avoid those things. I want you to keep that very clearly in your minds, because we'll be talking a lot about what animals experience, and some of you will be saying, oh, we can't work out what they experience. I mean, they don't speak the same language as us, they're subjective, you know. It's all inference and it's anthropomorphic projection and all that sort of stuff. I'll be telling you about the place of those experiences and the guide they give us to the way we provide for the animals. So note also that the 5 freedoms drew attention to the need to understand, identify and minimize negative states. And the major focus, was the major focus of animal welfare research and activity for at least the first 2 decades after John Webster devised them. Also, no, you probably can't see that. Also recall, I'll read it. Also recall the problem-solving ethos of being free of problems. Now, when I started my undergraduate years in 1962, and we learnt about the experimental basis of physiology. And what we learnt there was the way you came to understand how the body works was to identify a problem, look at the mechanisms that underlie the problem, then manipulate the mechanisms to solve the problem. And it was sort of problem solving across the board in biological science to understand how animals work, to understand how the human body works and how we treat both. So there was a problem-solving ethos, and broadly I think in John Webster's mind was the notion that the 5 freedoms were there to be free of problems. But as you will see from the disadvantages, things evolved. So initially freedoms was meant to mean as free as possible from, because of course we all know you can't be free of thirst and you can't be free of hunger, and none of us have ever been, in our lives, have ever been totally free of pain and nausea and other stuff like this. So what happened was that because it was expressed as freedoms, freedom from thirst, hunger and malnutrition, it came to be regarded as freedom as an absolute, complete and fundamental freedom, so that animals should never have negative experiences. Of course, human beings never have negative experiences, do they? So we were bringing to animals what was impossible for us and actually what is impossible for them, and biologically completely misguided, as we will see. So they were now, the 5 freedoms were commonly described. You see a lot of websites describe them in this way: ideal or aspirational states or principles that provide a logical and comprehensive guide for animal welfare assessment and management. Our current knowledge shows that such statements are conceptually and biologically inaccurate and misleading. As ideal or aspirational states, they're impossible to achieve. Thus, the principles as principles, they're unsound and illogical, and they do not provide a convincing basis for animal welfare assessment and management. I like to sugarcoat that message. I don't want to sort of hit you too hard with it. I'll explain. You'll see why, and you will agree with me. I know. You'll agree with me. No. You will agree with me because the biological understanding is such now that you will find it really compelling, what underlies that. So, also expressed as freedoms, they cannot be used to grade animal welfare compromise, and we'll see why that's important shortly, although we won't be grading it. And the meaning of, because the meanings of degrees of impaired freedom is rather, is conceptually obscure and lacks utility. Now, remember that it was the provisions that were used primarily in legislation and in animal welfare codes, and if you look at them, you will see is how you should manage different aspects of the animals and what their facilities should be, and what preparedness you need to have, and so on. So, now I won't reread them, but basically these are the provisions that were in the 5 freedoms, and quite nicely, if you look at the 5 freedoms and do just a little bit of juggling, you realise that they come out as 5 domains or categories: nutrition, environment, health, behaviour, and mental state. And if you pull the different things, because when John devised them, he had mental state and mental state and physiological state in each one of the freedoms. Now, one of the things that, this was my physiological background at New England University, I recognised that actually it was what was functionally going on inside the animal and also what was going on outside the animal that influenced the brain processing that gave rise to freedoms. And so I wanted to put mental state, the experiences, separate from these other areas. So, 3 key issues arise with the 5 freedoms. The provisions are more influential than the freedoms because they provide practical advice on welfare management. Most negative experiences listed in the 5 freedoms can only be minimised, not eliminated. And the freedoms mostly focused on negative experiences, but we now must also include positive experiences, which is the first time I've mentioned them. 3 steps are therefore recommended. Avoid reference to the 5 freedoms to reduce misconceptions and confusion. Emphasise the provisions, but update them to give attention to negative and positive experiences or states. And align each provision with relevant animal welfare aims that emphasise animal welfare experiences that affect their welfare. So what experiences that they care about more than others, and we'll see what that means shortly. Okay, so here's your substitute for the 5 freedoms. This is freely available, free download from that reference there. Provision. Good nutrition. Provide ready access to fresh water and a diet to maintain full health and vigour, and the aim is to minimise thirst and hunger and to enable eating to be a pleasurable experience. No objections? No. Good environment. Now, the environment tends to be what we would find indoors or the immediate meteorological environment of animals, rather than the broader concept of environment that we come to when we talk about behaviour. Good environment. Provide shade, shelter, or suitable housing, good air quality, and a comfortable resting area. Minimise discomfort and exposure, and promote thermal, physical, and other comforts. Good health. That was spontaneous. I didn't realise it's not really appropriate. It's like to break things up so you don't drop off to sleep. Okay, good health. Prevent or rapidly diagnose and treat disease and injury and foster good muscle tone, posture and cardiorespiratory function. And that's pretty good for us as well. We need to do that for ourselves. Minimise breathlessness, nausea, pain and other aversive experiences, and promote the pleasures of robustness, vigour, strength and well-coordinated physical activity. And for sport animals that's pretty important. But it's also important for animals that aren't primarily, don't primarily have the activity of sport. Appropriate behaviour provides sufficient space, proper facilities, congenial company, and appropriately varied conditions to minimise threats and unpleasant restrictions on behaviour, and promote engagement in rewarding activities. And then the fifth provision is positive mental experiences. Provides safe, congenial and species appropriate opportunities to have pleasurable experiences. And the aim promote various forms of comfort, pleasure, interest, confidence and a sense of being in control. Now, you will note that the fifth one is emphatically orientated towards positives, and you'll see why shortly. Okay, so the 5 domains. Now, very important thing. It's easy to think of the 5 freedoms sort of as a definition of animal welfare, and therefore to transpose that into thinking that the 5 domains is a definition of animal welfare. It is not. Okay? I don't actually agree with the notion of defining animal welfare. I think we should characterise animal welfare in terms of its major attributes, the major features that enable us to understand animal welfare, because then we don't get caught out by saying animal welfare is, and we go out telling everyone what animal welfare is, and then after we learn 10 years of research, we have to go and say, well, actually, that wasn't quite right, or it was wrong, and we now think this. Well, if you don't know what you think, why the hell should I take any notice of it? So, in principle, I think we should recognise that we are part of a state of flux of understanding in animal welfare science as in any other science, and that we need to, in the way we present the outcomes of our science, recognise that, and that ideas will evolve. What we regarded as true 20 years ago has been substantially modified in those 20 years, and some of it was wrong or misleading, as I've just said. So I prefer to characterise it in terms of its key attributes. The model is not an accurate representation of body structure and function. Each domain has the purpose of focusing attention on particular areas of relevance to animal welfare assessment and management. And there is some overlap, as we will see. Now, when there is overlap, there's no need for people who are interested in how many angels are on pinheads to start arguing about what should be in what domain and that shouldn't be in this one and so on. It's totally futile. If you're dealing with pain, for example, from injuries in the immediate physical environment, you don't have to re-deal with that under health and injury, under the health domain. You do it in one place. The main thing is to be comprehensive and to do it. Okay, so it is a focusing device. It's designed to facilitate systematic, structured, coherent and comprehensive animal welfare assessments. Grandiose claims, I know. That's what it's designed to do. Okay, now, I'm going to put the following poster up. You've all actually seen it. This is a much more picturesque one than the one you're going to see, and Julie and her colleagues came up with this, and I think it's very nice. They also came up with this one, which is a summary, which is really rather nice as well. Now, the point is, as you'll see, there's a lot of detail in that, just as there's a lot of detail in that, which, as I said, is the much less picturesque version of this. Now, you don't have to have a heart attack and say, oh, I'll never know that. What you do is you take your PDF version of that, and if you haven't got a PDF version of this, Julie will distribute it to you, so you can actually blow it up, not with dynamite, but so it's A3 size, and put it on your wall. And it's on the walls of all sorts of places where people can consult it. And it's there as an aid memoir. It's not there as a truth or anything like that. I was just saying to Andrew earlier, who mentioned to me, which I hadn't known, that he's been using it in the context of thinking about the welfare of elephants. And there may actually be things here that we know about, say, horses or farm animals that we don't know about elephants, and if you don't know it, you can't really put it down. But it might guide you to look at those things in elephants or whales. It's been used for whales as well. And there may be elements in some animals. Now this is for mammals and birds, okay? It's not just for horses, it's for mammals and birds. So you'll see some things that are rather general. But there will be some things like, for example, I don't know what the experience of echolocation is. I'm not a whale or I'm not a bat. So there'll be some things we do know and some things we can't know. But there might be some things we can speculate about cautiously. So this is an aid memoir. And what I want to do before I summarise that is just to point out the structure. 5 domains: nutrition, environment, health, behaviour, giving rise to subjective, affective is the general technical name, the subjective experiences, which is the mental state, which is the mental domain. The first 3, nutrition, environment and health, are survival critical factors. The situation-related factors are reflected by the behavioural domain. Okay? And I'll explain, you'll see how that comes about shortly. Each has got a negative and a positive, with the associated negative and positive experiences that are likely, that the animals are likely to have. Now, maybe there are some animals that we don't know enough about where we can't talk about some of those experiences. That's okay, you just don't talk about it. You can only observe, you can only assess what you can observe and what you can meaningfully observe. Now, the survival critical ones, nutrition, environment and health, relate to what is going on in the body. So that the physiological states in the body, the disturbances within the body, give rise to sensory inputs up to the brain that generate particular experiences. Now the example is, or examples, if you have compromised breathing, you can end up with an experience of breathlessness. Now, I'm not going to ask anyone who happens to be have asthma to put their hand up, but there will be people in this room who've experienced asthma. And you will also have a very clear idea of what breathlessness is like. And there will be others who have run like mad and until they've collapsed, and they'll know what breathlessness is like as well. Okay? So, the thing about breathlessness is, if you have compromised breathing, if your respiratory apparatus is blocked in any way, not even fully blocked, but even slightly blocked, all you have to do is block one nostril and breathe through your nose. Breathe through your nose for several minutes and walk around, and you will understand what breathlessness feels like. But if you've got a heart condition, for God's sake, don't do it. But the point of breathlessness, thirst and hunger being negative experiences, and can be really negative experiences, is they compel us to behave in ways to correct it. So, if I'm doing this to you, you're going to be fighting to get my hand off your nose and mouth so that you can restore oxygen supply to your body. It's really important that you can do that. You can't have a committee meeting to decide whether or not you're going to do it, because committee meetings take hours and you'll be dead within 10 minutes. Okay. Thirst is slightly less urgent, but is equally urgent, just as hunger. And pain, of course, is a way of alerting you to something that's already happening or has happened, and to get you to do something about it. So the negativity is really important. The intense negativity, when the imbalance is marked, is really, really important, because it gives a sense of urgency to respond. That's why you can't be free. And it's biologically meaningless to talk about elimination of these experiences. Situation-related ones relate to domain 4, and that is what is captured in domain 4 by looking at the animal's behaviour is cautiously interpreting how they perceive their external environment. And we'll see examples of that shortly. So you've got sensory inputs from within the body related to survival critical things, and you've got sensory inputs from outside the body which help the animal to decide what it thinks about its environment, whether it is congenial or whether it isn't, whether it's terribly tedious or frightening or in some other way negative, or actually pleasurable because of all these opportunities that I can engage in that I find interesting or enjoyable or whatever. Okay, now identity now. Minus VE and plus VE means negative and positive. It saves a long line off the scale. Okay, so that's negative and that's positive. It identifies both negative and positive elements in each domain: physical functional states, 1 to 3, perceived external circumstances, 4, and the aligned negative and positive experiences, the subjective experiences that the animals can have. Cautiously interpreted. So, there's the biological background, and so we can look at a few examples. And what we'll do, how are we doing for time? So, first of all, we'll look at nutrition, then we'll look at environment, then health, then behaviour, and we'll look at negatives, then we'll look at positives, just to give you some examples. Now, tomorrow, what we'll be doing is, with that in mind, and a little reminder at the start, we'll be doing a 5 domains analysis of what is being done well with sport horses. Okay? And what that will draw out, although it isn't the primary purpose of the session, is it will highlight to people what things need improvement. But it'll be you people who will come up with those thoughts. I won't be. I'm quite happy to contribute there, but the main thing is for you to, in thinking about what is going well, you will inevitably be thinking about what the limits on that are. So, domain 1, affective experiences lead to subjective experiences. Restrictions on, this is domain 1, then going to domain 5, the mental state. Water intake, food quality, food variety, and then as equal to the restrictions on voluntary overeating. Thirst, general hunger, it's hunger for energy-rich intake. Salt hunger. Everyone here know about salt hunger? How many of you have, in the last few days and weeks of really high temperatures, if you've been engaged in activity at all, there may be some of you who have actually felt as if you're getting the flu. Sort of feel headachy and weak and listless and even a bit nauseous. And you think you might be getting the flu. Now, big stretcher. If you are not on blood pressure and cardiac medication, take a teaspoon of salt, mix it up in water and drink it, and you will find that it is not unpleasant. It's actually quite pleasant. You don't have a sense of the really strong salty taste where you say, oh, it's too salty. If you actually do that with fruit juice, I mean, the point of the salt is that there is a thing called salt hunger, and many of you have put salt licks out for animals, right? You see them go up and they're licking the salt. Sorry? Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes. Anyone who sweats suffers. I first became aware of this when I was playing golf. And I was talking, it was about 10 years ago, and I was talking to these old guys who were as old as I am now. See, I'm pretty old. And I said, have you ever felt this? And, oh, yeah. I said, well, look, try this. as long as you're not on heart or blood pressure medication. You know. And what you do is you actually mix it up with fruit juice that's got sugar in it. Because the thing is, if you just drink salt water, it won't be absorbed from the gut. In the gut, you need sugar as well as the salt for it to be absorbed and then pull the water from inside your gut into your body. And that's a very simple thing for correction of dehydration. So, I said to these guys, do that. And what will happen is, if it isn't flu, within 30 minutes you're going to feel fine. Okay? If you've got the flu, you won't. If you've got heart and soul problems, you may not feel anything. Anyway, the next week, someone said, "You remember what you said last week?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I tried that and it really works." I said, "But you're on blood pressure." "Oh, I didn't take any notice of that," he said. So you've got to be very careful about, make sure you write down all the precautions that you've given them. Anyway, so hot salt hunger is real. Malnutrition, the malaise of malnutrition, and the bloated feelings of being overfull. Then if we think about positives, opportunities to drink enough water, eat enough food, eat a balanced diet, eat a variety of foods, eat correct quantities of food. The wetting, quenching pleasures of drinking, we all know those, and we're not talking about beer at the pub, we're talking about water when we're feeling really dehydrated, although beer at the pub's pretty good. Pleasure of different tastes and smells, the pleasure of different textures as well, the pleasure of the salt taste, masticatory pleasures, the pleasure of chewing. One of the things that is regarded as a really positive thing for ruminants is rumination, chewing. Postprandial satiety, so after you've eaten your food you actually feel comfortably full. And gastrointestinal comfort. Moving on. So now look at the environment. Thermal extremes, injurious physical features, injuries from close confinement. These are the sorts of things you get with animals in crates and cages and relatively small yards with high population of animals. Atmospheric pollutants, environmental monotony, whether ambient or physical. So the same temperature, the same light intensity, all this sort of thing. Negatives, thermal discomfort, chilling or hyperthermic distress. Physical discomfort, pain. Now remember, when we get to health, pain is also there. But if you think of it, if you deal with it under this domain, you don't deal with it in the health. Or you can leave that and deal with it in the health. Bruises, cuts, fractures, arthritis, skin rashes. Respiratory discomfort, inflammation and breathlessness, malaise from unnatural constancy. Now, that's not a full list. There's a longer list in the actual, in the big table. Available conditions, thermally tolerable, physical hazards minimal, space for freer movement, there is freer movement, fresh air, normal environmental variability, thermal, physical, respiratory and variety-related comforts. And we've got health. Disease, presence of acute or chronic disease, acute or chronic injury, functional impairment, acute or chronic limitation after limb amputation, partial lung resection, or renal, cardiovascular or other disease. Poor physical fitness. Now, I should mention that the original use of the 5 domains model was to assess the negative impacts of research, teaching and testing procedures. That was its genesis. So these functional impairments might be imposed. In the normal veterinary context, it may be as a result of therapy. Negatives. Breathlessness, pain of many types. There are at least 27 different sorts of pain. Debility and weakness, sickness, nausea, dizziness, muscle weakness. Little or no disease, this is positives, or injury, or functional impairment, good physical fitness, the comforts of high functional capacity, and the vitality of fitness. And then we come to the behavioural domain. This is where I want to give you a definition of agency. An animal exercises agency, as we do, when it engages in voluntary, self-generated and goal-directed behaviours. Many such behaviours are rewarding and are accompanied by positive experiences. So, in the behavioural domain, we're talking about, in terms of negatives, we're talking about impeded exercise of agency, where animals cannot exercise those choices for whatever reason. And you can imagine that in terms of things like sow stalls and cage layers and other intensive management practices, that would be covered by this. Invariant barren environments, whether it's ambient, physical or biological. Constraints on environment-focused activities, and we'll see what that means in a moment. Constraints on animal-to-animal interactive activities. Limited sleep or rest. Limits on threat avoidance, escape or defensive activity. Negatives: anger, frustration, boredom, helplessness, loneliness, isolation, depression, withdrawal, unsatisfied sexually, exhaustion, anxiety, fear, panic, and neophobia, being afraid of unfamiliar and new circumstances. Opportunities to exercise agency via varied, novel, engaging environmental challenges. Now, if you look at almost any animal that you can imagine and think of it in its natural environment, and if you look at the way it interacts with its natural environment, you will see it is anything but half-hearted about exploration, if it is a varied and interesting environment. Freedom of movement and exploration, foraging or hunting. I have never seen a cat or a lion or another predator that was anything but utterly committed to stalking and attacking its food, its potential food source. I've actually, when there is variety, I've never in fact seen any animal that has a wide choice that's half-hearted about foraging. Think of domestic pigs when you put them out. Any animal you care to. There's actually a marvellous video of lab rats released into a wild environment in Oxford. Rats free, rat secure fence, so the rats can go all over Oxford. Where they followed their behaviour once they were given the opportunity to live in a wild environment instead of a barren shoebox cage. And if you want to write this down, Manuel Verdoy, V-E-I-D-O-Y, rats released in Oxford study, and it will come up, and it's absolutely amazing. When they were first released, the rats would come out of a burrow, and they'd sort of be wandering around a bit like this. Now, that isn't what rats do in the wild. They come to the burrow, they look around and make sure there's nothing up top that's going to come down and grab them and eat them. And then they go like that to wherever they're going. The behaviour is entirely different. Within a couple of weeks, I think the lab rats were doing that. They built a whole community of tunnels and all this sort of thing. So what do they say? You can take the rat out of the wild, but not the wild out of the rat. You can take the pig out of the general environment. But you can't take the general environment out of the pig, because after generations on farms, you release them to a woodland and they will behave as their ancestors would have, collecting up to 1 kilogram of material to make a nest for farrowing that is sufficiently soft that when they roll over they don't crush penguins. Not ideal, of course, but anyway. So, foraging, hunting, bonding, reaffirming bonds, rearing young, playing, sexual activity, sleeping and resting, using refuge as a retreat or defensive attack. And then the experiences: calmness, vitality, reward, affectionate sociability. Can't say they love each other, it's bonded. And I can say to my wife, I'm feeling affectionately social. She doesn't find that very convincing. Control myself. Maternal, paternal, or group care of young. No, group care of young is there because when you look at wild dogs in Africa and they make a kill or they manage to get a kill for a lion or whatever, the male sort of comes through and eats his fill and then goes off, and people who have interests in this sort of thing in terms of the balance between the gender balance between assertiveness and all this sort of thing, which is right up there now, quite rightly I should say, he said, quite rightly I should say. And they say, oh yeah, typical male, follow them back to the den, and you will find that the first thing that male does, he goes back to the den, vomits up what he's eaten, so that the female that's back there lactating and rearing the pups gets something to eat. Right? Group care. Amazing what you see when you look at this person. Excitation and playfulness, sexually gratified, energized, refreshed, secure, protective, confident. That's the point when I was looking up literature on sexual gratification in animals. I had to do a very quick delete when stuff on bestiality came up. But of course animals don't enjoy sex. They do it to pass on their genes. They drop their genes and pass on their genes. Okay. Now I haven't got started yet. But you're playing it. Yeah, right, okay. Now we started with quite a limited number of negative and negative experiences, and now we're talking about quite a large number of negatives and positives. Don't worry, I'm not saying you need to be able to measure these in order to be able to operate with this in mind, and I will explain that very clearly. Now, this is the one that Julie and her colleague produced. Much more picturesque than I did, but you've got that in your folder, and a PDF can be made available so that you can actually magnify it to a larger size for a poster on your notice folder. Now let's think about 7 key applications of the model. We won't go through them one at a time. And on the list, we'll just pick them up as we go. It specifies key general foci for animal welfare management. Good nutrition, good environment, good health and appropriate behaviour. Good application of the provisions achieves the relevant experiential affective outcome. Now this is technical for saying when we understand, and we do understand, is that animals in particular circumstances have particular unpleasant experiences or can have particular pleasant experiences. You don't have to be able to measure those. All you need to know is these circumstances produce that nasty experience, so what do? If it's thirst, you provide water. Gosh, that's hard. If it's hunger, you provide food. If you want the animal to have a pleasurable experience while eating, you give it food it likes to eat. Or you give it choices so that it has a range of things that it will eat, perhaps different ones at different times. Now this may not be appropriate entirely in your particular circumstances, but that's the logic behind it. So you don't have to be able to measure these experiences. All you need to do is understand that animals can have negative experiences which can be extremely negative, that they have to have in order to survive, so that they will eat, they will breathe, they will drink, they will avoid injury and so on. And you manage them in ways that you minimise them. So the objective here is to minimise these negative experiences. to tolerably low levels that still stimulate the required change. Okay, so we can't measure them directly, but we can manage them practically, and that's where the provisions come in. So you're not being told you've got to have all this airy-fairy knowledge about what they're experiencing. You're saying, treat them in these ways and you'll avoid those, you'll minimise those. Treat them in these ways and you'll provide them with opportunities for pleasurable experiences. Here are some examples of opportunities for pleasure. I'm not putting it up at the moment, I'm just waiting here. Here are some examples of pleasurable experiences that when you look at it, you may say, oh, I could actually modify the way I'm managing my horses in this particular way that could improve the opportunity for them to have pleasurable experiences. Now you'll see this several times. Survival critical negative experiences relating to internal imbalances and disruptions, breathlessness, thirst, hunger, pain, nausea, dizziness, debility, weakness and sickness. Situation-related negative experiences, threatening, barren, restricted, isolated, anxiety, fear, panic, helplessness, loneliness, boredom, depression, frustration and anger are the sorts of experiences that animals would have under those red conditions. Is if there's no pain, there is no welfare compromise. They don't think, or didn't think, about other negatives that were involved in this. And you've just seen. It's not just pain. Pain is certainly one of them. But you've got all these other potential negatives. So it's pain and others. But just saying pain and suffering isn't directed enough, isn't specific enough to say, you really need to be looking at respiratory function here. You really need to be looking at renal function here. You really need to be looking at gastrointestinal problems. And so on. So the model is much more specific about the range of negatives that animals can experience, and that helps us focus our attention, our welfare attention, on these areas that give rise to those specific things. And that's just reminding you of all the negatives. The model is also very specific about potential positives. Situation-related positive experiences where they feel safe, they're in a stimulus-rich environment that is spacious, allowing plenty of movement, and they have congenial companions. So the capacity there to feel calm, secure, protected, confident, engaged, interested, in control, affectionately sociable, in control, bonded, rewarded maternally, paternally, or as a group, excitedly, playfully, sexually gratified. Now, it's not that everything, you've got to give them everything. We'll come to that sort of thing in a moment. But those are the possible positives that they can experience. This specificity enables more precise targeting via the provisions to correct particular welfare compromises and to promote particular welfare enhancements. Okay, so it enables monitoring. You do a welfare assessment now, do another one later, and you can see whether it's stayed the same, whether it's improved, whether it's got worse, and if between the two you have done something, it's a way of assessing the impact of what you've done in welfare terms. Now, but very important, we can only talk about indices that are available, so if they haven't been developed yet, can't talk about it, and that are observable. You might be able to observe something close up with an animal in a stall, but 100 metres away in a paddock you may not be able to see it. So you need to be aware that there are limitations on what you can see and adjust accordingly. Now, you can, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but you can actually do a qualitative grading of negatives. If it's research, teaching and testing, there are 5 levels. No negative, low, mild to moderate, marked to severe, very severe. It may actually only be possible under some circumstances to say there's none or it's really bad. Or none, middle, really bad. Or in some circumstances maybe none and mild or moderate. So just because there are 5 grades doesn't mean you've got to put 5 grades in. What you do is you see what the circumstances are that allow you to say anything at all. And then the 4-tier enhancement scale relates to the provision of opportunities. The key there is the extent to which the animals take advantage of those opportunities. We can talk about that in more detail tomorrow as we move on. Nearly there. It enables both prospective and retrospective welfare assessment in terms of the research, teaching and testing. It was prospective. As you'll see here, the 5 domains model has been a required part of the regulatory management of research, teaching and testing on sentient animals in New Zealand since 1997. Every person putting in an application to an animal ethics committee has to have done a prospective 5 domains analysis. It's not actually called a 5 domains analysis, but that's what they're doing. And then subsequently they have to do a retrospective one to see whether or not their assessment was correct. So these have been done during the devising of new zoo and aquarium things. I think you've got a PDF of this. Caring for Wildlife, the World Zoo and Aquarium Association Animal Welfare Strategy. Changes in husbandry, housing of farm, working with sports animals, evaluation of pest control devices and tools, and then more recently, although not some of them not here, the same as above, retrospective, but forensic use in expert witness work. Rebecca Ledger and I have written a paper, again freely available from animals, on the use of that in dogs, but the principles are the same, and indicating how the judiciary need to move from just clinical and physical science of a problem into taking into account, on the basis of the behaviour and knowing what happened to the animals, the affective, the experiential side. Just heard from Andrew that he's been using the model in terms with elephants, and it's also been used with whales, and of course there are a number of other uses, and one was with detailed examination, led by Paul McGreedy, and a number of people here were involved in that. Provides quality of life. Provides quality of life assessment and contributions to quality of life assessment. That's complex. There's no all-inclusive metric for quality of life for a whole variety of reasons. Remembering that the only welfare attributes you can use are those that you can observe and for which there are indices. Nevertheless, it can be helpful. So, for example, if you're wanting to make a quality of life decision about an animal, whether it's a horse or a dog or anything else, if you know that the animal used to behave in a particular way where it was obviously enjoying itself, if you take a dog for example, it used to really enjoy going for a walk and playing and all this sort of thing, and it no longer does now, and you know that there is something particular in terms of the survival critical stuff that's going wrong, that could give you evidence to say we really need to think about putting it down. It doesn't make the decision for you, but it helps you arrive at the decision. There'll be elements with equine incidents and circumstances where that could come into hand. If the animal is still enjoying these things that it obviously has enjoyed in the past, and it actively engaged in it, and it doesn't appear to be in having significant negative experiences like pain and other things like that, then that would be reason maybe to delay the euthanasia. And this is where this is very important. So, one of the things about the situation-related negatives, you cannot get rid of these, but you can minimise them. You can get rid of those by giving opportunity to engage in behaviours that are rewarding. You can't necessarily get rid of all of them, but you can, through environmental enrichment, you can move a significant number of these situation-related negatives into positive experiences by animals having opportunities to do that. But bear in mind, you have to keep on managing the survival critical negatives, because if they are significant, even if the opportunities are there, the animal will not take those opportunities, and hence they will inhibit the expression of those. So that's the basis of helping you with euthanasia decisions, but it's also the basis of a necessity to have a double-pronged approach to animal welfare. One is the minimisation to tolerably low levels of those things that you'll never get rid of, which are essential for survival. The other is to minimise, as far as is possible, the situation-related ones, and give as many opportunities for pleasurable experiences as is practically possible. Notice, as is practically possible. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you take this, oh gosh, we can't do this, there's so much. Think of one thing and do that. That would be a step forward. Okay, so we're concluding remarks. The minimalist aim of mere survival, is it sufficient? The biological functioning approach, that's only based on the survival critical stuff, focuses on survival-related factors and can achieve survival, but this will usually only minimise or neutralise negative experiences. Nevertheless, it's important to do this as I've just explained. And if you don't, then even if the positives are there, the animals won't, and you use those opportunities. How can survival be accompanied by a good quality of life? By identifying positive experiences that animals may have and by providing them with opportunities to have those experiences. Notice it's provisions, provisions, provisions. It's not, I've got to measure this. But by looking at behaviour, you will be able to get a reasonable gauge, carefully, critically evaluate a careful gauge of whether or not things are successful. How can such positive experiences be identified? Surprise, surprise. Used as an aid memoir, the 5 domains model. How can the latest comprehensive version of the model, 2015 model, be used to improve quality of life? First, consider the potential positive experiences that are known to be aligned with survival-related and situation-related factors. Remember the quenching, thirst quenching, tastes that animals enjoy, the positives of physical fitness and so on. Second, for each domain, assess whether the circumstances would impede or allow animals to have those rewarding experiences. Third, seek to introduce and or maintain beneficial circumstances, recognising that once in existence, they are enrichments. Questions to support enrichment initiatives. What opportunities have been provided for animals' comfort, pleasure, interest, confidence, choice and challenge? What provisions have been made to ensure that consuming the food provided will be an enjoyable experience? How will expressions of normal behaviour be encouraged and harmless wants met? So you're not going to just let the Labrador eat as much as it can, so you will limit what it eats so that you can maintain its health. It doesn't end up with diabetes and joint trouble and unable to move and you're getting back trouble. You're having trouble lifting it. What environmental choices will be available that will encourage exploration and food acquisition activities that are enjoyable? And I'll read this What provisions have been made to enable social species to engage in bonding and bond-affirming activities, and as appropriate, other affiliative interactions such as maternal, paternal and group care of young, play behaviour and sexual activity. Just in terms of affiliative activities, at Melbourne Zoo, they had, I think the baboons, anyway, they had a primate colony where they used to be in a cage, a very large cage. They created an outdoor arena which would be probably 3 times the size of this room, with various circumstances in it, you know, high places where they can dominate or look or whatever, and so on. And it struck me that it wouldn't take those baboons any time at all to know every crack or crevice in that environment. But there was some wall there and the visitors were here, so the visitors ended up part of environmental enrichment, the birds going over the top and so on. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a huge amount of mutual grooming going on. It was 3 generations of baboons in the one colony. A huge amount of mutual grooming. And what they said was, whereas they always had baboons in the surgery being stitched up before they did this, they never had any after that. That in fact it could be that some rewarding experiences can compensate for others that aren't there. So that, for example, a real diverse environment where they're free to roam wherever they want to do out on the savannah, for example, might at least to some extent be compensated for by the capacity to be able to groom each other and have open bonding. Finally, let's be clear. It's not possible to eliminate all negatives that animals may have, but it is possible to minimise them. And it's also possible to replace some situation-related negatives with positive ones using enrichments. That's it.